What is it that we value? What is it that we're willing to sacrifice for? And what is it, that we sacrifice for and we did so because it's something that helped to bring some sort of joy or enjoyment or fulfillment or meaning or purpose into our life. I can remember saving up for my first electric guitar. Some of you might remember is that jet black Ibanez RG 570. It was around 1990 that I got that thing. And I worked on a mushroom farm, working, in the warehouse a little bit, but mostly shoveling manure for about $5 an hour. And that guitar was about $800. So that was a lot of poop I had to shovel to get that guitar. But I sacrificed it. I sacrificed my back. I sacrificed the awesome smell because I wanted that guitar. And I think it worked out well for me. And also, kind of like Jeff mentioned over there, I remember trying to save up for a down payment on our house quite a few years ago. Do you remember when people could actually do that, like buy a house? Oh, the good old days. Yeah, I remember we worked really, really hard to do that because we had the value to be homeowners, to have a stable home and a place for our children to grow up and all that kind of stuff. So we sacrificed hard for that. And now that we're, shall we say, less young, we have our eyes fixed more firmly on just putting away savings for old age. We have another goal there that we're sacrificing and we're working towards. So this whole process of saving for something of meaningful worth requires that we ask a very serious question. What matters the most? What matters the most? Because we can't have everything. We must pick and choose. What matters most? Got to pick and choose and focus our attention there. And in the process of answering that question, we wrestle with the fact that there is sacrifice necessary if we're going to achieve our goal, to obtain whatever it is, whatever that thing is that matters most. Sacrifice is unavoidable. Now, we commonly call this process of sacrifice for the goal delayed gratification. Because it takes a while, it takes some time for us to actually see that thing that we're working for, that we're hoping for, that we're moving towards. There's a delay, there's some time there, this delayed gratification. But if we sacrifice and we work for it, the hope is, and most times, more often than not, we actually see it. So we sacrifice in this process something of lesser value so that we can have something else of greater value. We sacrifice some things now for something later. That's the process. And that, again, that delay is necessary for the big reward. Because the big things, the things that are of real value, they need time to be nurtured, to be poured into. They need time to grow and to develop and to blossom. Whether we're talking about a savings account with compound interest, or whether we're talking about, for example, a marriage that takes, after decades, it's just like, okay, there's something here that can only be had several decades later that you can't have right now. Something needs to be poured into and nurtured and grown. So the delay is necessary for the big reward in so many ways. So as we've likely experienced too, there's a special sweetness to that sacrifice. You know that little element that I'm talking about, that special sweetness of the sacrifice of the work, that special sweetness to the waiting. Like you appreciate something more when you've worked really hard for it, when you've sacrificed for it. Like, those vegetables out of your garden. You appreciate them because you worked hard for them. You got dirt in your fingers and you waited, and there they are. And then when they're on their plate, it's like, yeah. Or that moose burger. You work hard for that thing. And then it's just like, I appreciate this so much. It nearly killed me. This is so delicious. Or let's say, for our students here, when you make the honor roll or the dean's list or something like that, it's like, yeah, you worked hard for it and you did it. Or like Kathy did, where you're getting fit and you do like your first 5K or your triathlon or a 50K. I don't even know how that's possible, but he did it. Like there's something there like, this is sweet. You cross that finish line. There's a special satisfaction and joy in enjoying something of great value. And also with that knowledge in our heads that we could also be in this moment and left with a lot less or even left with nothing. Because we could have squandered our choice and our opportunity for a passing pleasure in exchange for this reward that we've gained. And that kind of helps bring the joy sweeter. And, like I could have watched TV instead of fought for that better mark. Not that such a thing ever happens. But in that pain, that's kind of in the process in one way or another. I mean, we're all familiar with that because we've all been there. We've all made a foolish choice. We've all done it where we've chosen something that didn't matter much, something that didn't matter most, or even something that just didn't matter at all. So we know that pain. So when we do get something that matters, with that in mind too, it's just like, yeah, there's just such incredible joy and satisfaction in the process. Well, if you've been paying attention through our journey to learn Jesus through Matthew's gospel, you will have noticed that Jesus frequently asks us the same question in one form or another. Jesus is constantly asking us, what matters most? And he lays out his argument. He reveals to us what he sees matters most, and he reveals to us the cost and the reward of all the choices. It's like, I think this matters most. You can choose this, you can choose this, you can choose this, you can choose this, you can choose that. And here's the consequence of all those choices. Jesus reveals to us these things, and then he leads us to a decision. He's always leading us to these decision points. And when he leads us to, like we've talked about so many times, you can't do a non-decision. A non-decision is a decision for the other thing. Jesus brings us to a decision point where you have to choose. Which one is it going to be? What matters most? Because from that point on, from the decision point, you are walking towards something. What's the something going to be? And is something that matters? Something that matters most. So in today's passage, we're going to see a strong development in what Jesus reveals to disciples when it comes to these questions and these issues about what matters most. What's the cost? And what's the reward? What'll it take to get there? How do we get there? How does this happen? We'll see Jesus go at it head on. So before we get too deep into it, I just want to give credit to Craig Keener, Tom Wright, and Don Carson. I'm going to steal a few ideas from them as we unfold this passage here. So let's turn in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 16, and we're going to start at verse 21. And just so it doesn't confuse a few of you reading along, I'm going to flip actually between the NIV translation and the NLT translation. There's a few bits where NLT just actually translates it a little bit better, has a little bit more gravity. So, okay, Matthew 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will repay each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Underlying this story, this section here, is a somewhat common vision, common goal, common desire among all the people here. When it comes to what matters most, there's some agreement here among the disciples and with Jesus. They all long to see the promises of God fulfilled. They long to see the promised kingdom come. This is why they're following him. They long to see Israel restored, to ultimately see the whole world healed and blessed. They long to see justice done, to see liberation, to see peace, to see flourishing. It's like all of us, we all experience this deep human longing for all things to be set right. Like there is a common goal here about what matters most. Now, the disciples don't yet know, as Jesus does, the depth of what God has planned and is about to do through Jesus and later through them. But there's a lot of common ground here in terms of what exactly it is that matters most, that we're all aiming for and that we're all fighting for. So immediately preceding this scene, you may remember a couple weeks ago when Bob delivered just a wonderful message on this. Immediately preceding this scene, Peter, by the revelation of the Spirit of God, just identified Jesus as the Messiah. He saw it, he got it. And so he kind of speaking on behalf of all the disciples, it's like, I know who you are. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And so it's like this, he came into the revelation and the realization, like this is the moment. This is it. This is the time where our greatest longings are being fulfilled right in front of our eyes. This is it. And so in that moment, Jesus commends him and he renames Simon, son of Jonah, to Peter, the rock. You see, Peter's the OG. He's the original rock. This is long before Dwayne Johnson. Peter's the rock. He's the rock. He's the sturdy guy. And so the rock learns that from what Jesus tells him and commissions him and blesses him, the rock learns that he's going to be an important part of what Jesus is doing to build up his church that will change the world. And Jesus will be releasing to him kingdom power and authority, these keys to bind, to loosen, to change things, to move things, to see heaven come to earth. And now that it's clear to the disciples, and especially Peter, that Jesus is the Messiah, now Jesus shifts into revealing more of the details about the messianic mission. Now that you get who I am, now let's talk some turkey about what we're going to do here. So he announced the kingdom is at hand, but now he reveals just how it arrives. From that time on, Jesus shifts the tone here. From that time on, the text says, Jesus begins to explain that he must go. Important little word in there. He must go. He must go to Jerusalem, to that center of power. He must go to suffer. He must go to the cross. He must be raised. So here's the rock. Just got the big download a couple of verses later. All right, you saw it. Here's all this stuff. So here's the rock. He's like, all right, listening to Jesus. March into Jerusalem, check. I'm in. Suffer many things. Say what? Be killed. Whoa, hold on. You stopped the bus. You know, the Messiah has finally arrived. The promised restoration is hand. Like the time we've been waiting for is here and now. And Peter is part of the inner circle of this messianic movement. Like Jesus is his friend. And he's hearing this. Peter here, he is ready for revolution. He's ready to march into Jerusalem to take over. March into Jerusalem, take over the temple. Let's get rid of all those corrupt religious leaders. Cleanse the temple, get them out. Let's march in there. We'll clear out the government halls. Let's march in there later, and then we're going to clear the land of the Romans. Let's use all that power that Messiah has been demonstrating here, and let's get on with this messianic program, because this is how the kingdom's going to come. Peter's ready, and he's good to go. But now Jesus is saying suffering and a cross. It's like, okay, dude. It's like, Jesus, come on. Okay, let me tell you how this works here. I get it. You're having a rough day, a long day. Maybe you're a little depressed. I don't know, like suffering and a cross. No. So Peter takes Jesus aside and he begins to rebuke him. Never. This will never happen to you. Peter desires the kingdom. He desires to see the kingdom. He knows enough to know that matters most. He also desires the glory and the honor that comes with it, the comfort and the security that God has promised. And in the process, he wants to preserve Jesus, the Messiah King, the means to their hope, like he's here. So he refuses the suffering, and especially so not in weakness, not suffering before the chief priests and the elders. It's like, really? No, you're not going to suffer, and certainly not death or a defeat. Like no, this isn't going to happen. So Peter issues that rebuke, never. And what do we see? Jesus turning to Peter. I would have loved to have been there just to see exactly how he said it. There is so much that you can't quite pick up just from the written text. I imagine that he didn't say it, and I could be totally wrong, so take this with a half grain of salt. I imagine he said it actually quite, instead of forcefully, just kind of like, get behind me, Satan. Quite somber. Like, you are a stumbling block to me. Remember, I'm your friend. Now you're causing me trouble here. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, just merely human concerns. As the one whom some of the greatest promises and commissions were made, one of the closest people to Jesus, Peter earns himself the toughest rebuke from Jesus. The closer we are, the more he looks after us. What does the proverb say? The Lord disciplines the one whom he loves. Yeah, in Matthew 4, the devil tempts Jesus to take the easy way, to gain the kingdom without suffering. And now here in this moment, Peter repeats that very same temptation. And Jesus rebukes it and identifies the source. This is from the devil. I've heard this before. I know where this is coming from. Now, in the early Christian perspective and what we see in the New Testament, like in James and Ephesians here, we read and we learn that the devil influenced this world so deeply that the world's values were quite often the devil's values. So by valuing the things humans value, such as this lack of suffering, Peter shows himself here in this moment to be influenced, to be enticed by the devil. The rock, ironically, is now the stumbling block. There's actually a play on words here in the text. The rock now becomes a stumbling block. Isn't that interesting how kind of a little side note here, how someone just had a major revelation from the Holy Spirit in 1 minute, and then the next minute they have a major revelation from the evil one. Always helps us to keep us on our guard. We look at how Jesus resisted those temptations. He knew the word. And here now Jesus is teaching Peter something about that word too. But anyways, Jesus clarifies in this moment is that the kingdom without a cross is the devil's idea. The kingdom without a cross is the devil's idea. He will not have it. So Jesus tells Peter, get behind me. When Peter rebuked Jesus, like he arrogantly forgot his position here as a disciple. It's like, oh, hey, I just got all this blessing and all this authority that Jesus said and all this stuff. It's like, and now Jesus, now I think you got it right here. Like, it's like, no. You need to remember who you are here. It's just like, get behind me. Now, also in this scene too, to bring even just a little bit of visual to it, scholars tell us that in that day that disciples typically followed behind their teachers, walking behind them out of a sign of respect as they walked together. So Peter would have been physically behind them. So though Jesus turned to confront Peter literally behind him, he now orders him to get behind him in an entirely different way, returning him to a necessary position of discipleship. Get behind me. You need to follow and you need to learn, because if you don't learn this, it's going to take you out. Get behind me. This rebuke is just as much about love as it is about discipline. It's just about as much about preserving him and leading him to life as it is about correcting something that needs correcting. Get behind me. If Peter wants what matters most, the only way he's going to get there is by getting behind Jesus, to follow closely and to follow Jesus wherever he goes. Because indeed, the path is narrow. And it's easy to fall in this ditch or in that ditch. The path is narrow. We need to follow closely. Now, Peter does not know and does not understand what Jesus does. God's ways are different than our ways. His thoughts are different from our thoughts. And their view, Peter's view, the disciples' view, their view of messiahship and what it means to be Messiah's people is saturated in this worldly view. They just can't shake that. This worldly view that, as we just talked about a few moments ago, this worldly view that is just inspired so much with the view of the enemy, which is why we see so much destruction. It's this view of power politic. Let's march in, revolution. Let's do it. From this time on, Jesus changes his whole mode of teaching, Matthew tells us. From this time on, Jesus reveals that at the heart of messiahship is surrender and suffering. And as it is for the Messiah, so it is for the people. The kingdom comes by a cross, not by a sword. Jesus' mission is to surrender. Jesus' mission is to surrender his life. And he expects his disciples to follow him in the same. Because that's the way of the kingdom. Jesus says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. I love the way that the NLT phrases it like that. If you want to be my follower, you must give up your own way. You have to follow this narrow path with me. You must give up your own way. You must give up your own way. Take up the cross. Take up your cross and follow me. Like, you would think that they would have learned by now that their way had not worked before Jesus came, and even after Jesus came, it didn't work. They saw disaster after disaster after disaster with all the liberators that came, and they thought, hey, here's the one, here's the guy, even liberators who claim to be the Messiah King. And they ran the same program over and over. And even once in their history, if you know around the Maccabean Wars, about 100 and maybe 20 years or so before Jesus, they actually did have a little bit of victory. It's like, oh, hey, look at this. They did it their own way, and they even saw a little bit of headway. But what happened? Quickly, that thing crumbled because there's something rotten at the core. Their way didn't work, even when they saw a little taste of revolutionary or military victory. It hadn't worked before, and it's not going to work again. Like, how many times have we learned the same lesson? When we know the way that Jesus is leading us, even if not super specific, we at least have a reasonable direction here where Jesus is leading us, and we still choose to go our own ways. So, you know what? I see what Jesus says, I see what the scripture says, but I'm smarter than that. I think I can outsmart this. I can kind of get this, but what they didn't know is this, and I do know, so I'm going to go over here. And we try and go our own way, and to quote the prophet Hosea, so how'd that work out for you? The answer usually isn't very good. It's usually pretty bad. How many times have we learned that same lesson? The only way to get to what matters most is to get behind Jesus, like behind him, and to follow him closely, and to go wherever he goes. And it doesn't always look like he's going to some good places, because, some bad things happened to him. But it didn't end that way. The only way to get there is to follow Jesus wherever he goes. To obtain that thing that matters most, it will require surrender and sacrifice. Again, Jesus says, if you try to hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. If you try to hang on to your life, go your own way, you're going to lose it. This is not going to end well. But if you do what I say, if you do surrender, if you do sacrifice, if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. It will end well. And he puts it in another way, like what good, kind of appealing to our sense of like our profit motive or our sense of self-interest, like what good would it be for you to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul? Look what Judas Maccabeus did a century and a half ago. Yeah, made some headway, but it didn't end well. What good would that be? Or I love his final question. Or what could a person offer to buy back his soul once he had lost it? Oh, that's heavy. That sounds to me like a rhetorical question. What could a person offer to buy back his soul once he lost it? Well, the answer is he'd give anything. You'd give anything. So it is possible to give anything, to give everything. And most, if not all of us, have actually been there before. Have you ever had a redemption moment in your life where you really messed it up bad? Like really messed it up bad? So bad that you would do anything to make it right or to get out? So bad that you did do anything to make it right, to get out? We've been there. We know it's possible. The difference is here is that Jesus calls us to this kind of surrender and this sacrifice before we experience the pain and the destruction of our ways. You're going to have to come to this point eventually. How would you like to get there? Would you like to get there on Jesus' terms, following him, getting his reward, getting his protection? Or do you want to try it on your own terms? See how that works out for you. The Gospels emphasize, Jesus emphasized that those who wish to follow him must understand that you are surrendering your life to him. You are surrendering your life to him. And to surrender to him and to take up his cross is not so much just a prerequisite of becoming his disciple, but this is actually a continuing characteristic of it. This is what it means to be his disciple, to be his follower, is to live constantly in this place of surrender and sacrifice. This is how we get to what matters most. The thing is that following him will cost everything, and it will give everything. Oh, hey, I like that math. Following him will cost everything and give everything. Jesus tells them after, you know what, this is the way to get to what matters most, but when I come in glory, in my Father's glory with the angels, when I come, I will repay, I will reward each person according to what they have done. Now, of course, that can go both ways here, but I believe the real thrust in the text here towards his disciples is that this will go really well. This will go really well. Yeah, we take a trip through suffering, but this will end well. We will find what matters most. You will be rewarded. Jesus keeps our eye on what matters most. He focuses our attention on the reward of God, the blessings of God, the promises of God, the fullness of which we can hardly understand. As you know, even in the best of times, we've only tasted and seen a small foretaste. Like the next section of scripture right after this one is the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus. Like we get this foretaste here to kind of back up what he's saying here about the reward of what it looks like when Jesus is in glory. And it's like, that's the glory that's destined to be given to us in him. And that's just one little small picture. Now think back to the examples that we gave when we started this whole message here. About all the things that we worked hard for, that we sacrificed for, that we saved up for. And if you can kind of see the end result of the reward there, however clear, however foggy, think of those examples now. It makes the surrender and the suffering more bearable to get there, isn't it? When you can kind of see the end result and the reward, that's why we did it. Jesus is setting us up for the same success. There it is. You can walk through this. This is the path that it takes to get there. You can do it. You can do it. If we can see that and result in the reward, it makes the surrender and the suffering to get there bearable. And maybe even as it says in James 1, it might even be a joy. Might even be a joy to walk through this crap because I know what God has promised for me. I see what matters most here. And yes, in the process, it's hard to patiently endure for a future that seems far off. And there is a kind of suffering and just the waiting and the working. You know, that whole I want it now thing that's just rampant in our culture. Like I can get anything, most anything instantly on my phone here with a couple of clicks. But the kingdom of God, can't order that on Amazon. You know, like it takes some time, but it will come sooner than we think. Like I'm standing here just like, how on earth did I get gray hairs? Yeah, I used to be just some rowdy little shit playing guitar. And, oh, pardon me. but it's like now I'm an old man. Like, it's coming a lot sooner. Actually, I'm going to reserve comment here. Wisdom is kicking in. I'll just say, respect to you. You got, solid experience. But the point is, even think about it, for yourself. It's just like, this life, like, that was short. That was short. For some of you who are, maybe identify with that comment, like, this life is short. This will come sooner than we think. So are you going to aim for what matters most? Are you going to be willing to follow Jesus through the surrender and the sacrifice? It's coming quick. It's coming quick, and his reward is good. And Jesus guarantees it with the sacrifice of his own life. That's the seal he made on the promise that it will be worth it, beyond what we could all ask or imagine. So we get behind Jesus and we can follow him forward into a future of glory. I just want to end with something that was on my mind as I was meditating on this passage here. Just a little snippet from Revelation chapter 21, verses 3 and 5. Just a little something that I use to kind of like a little appetizer. A little appetizer for this thing that is coming a lot quicker than we might think. Where John reports what he sees from Jesus. And he says, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among people. And he will dwell with them. They'll be his people. He will be their God. He'll wipe every tear. Dear God, we have a lot of tears. He will wipe every tear. No more death. No more mourning, crying, or pain. For that whole old order of things has passed away. And the one who is seated on the throne said, See, I am making all things new. That's what matters most.